Hi, I'm Allison Juzaitis, and for my final project, I wanted to look into how hateful are senatorial campaign ads really. So I'm sure we've all seen ads like these, whether it be on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, anything of the sort that seemingly attack an opposing candidate or Washington, somebody's values, somebody's appearance, or whatever else. So I wanted to see how prevalent are these really? Is it just the media boosting up our differences, and in what sense or how much time is really spent on attacking the other side? So what I did is, this is just a screenshot of my spreadsheet where I collected all my data. Is I took the top two candidates from each senatorial race, of which in 2020 there were 35, so 70 candidates, and I attempted to collect at least 5 videos from each of them, specifically video campaign ads. And I did this by searching and just selecting the top or top 5 to avoid bias. In some cases, obviously, like in the case of Gary Peters, they have deleted a lot of their previous ads. So for those, I just averaged the amount of time on the ones that I could find. So specifically, when I found the information, what I did is I looked at first the time of the ad, and I noted that down, the time spent on opposing candidate and the time spent on politicians. So I selected the time as my metric for hatefulness because I learned over my research that when a candidate is focusing on their opposing candidate or anyone else, it is always inherently negative. They are never saying anything good about the candidate, anything good about politicians or Washington in general. It is always negative, attacking their character, their policies, their history, or whatever else. So time is a good indicator of how they are attacking another person. To find the percentage for each of these, I just divided the time spent on either the candidate or politicians and divided it by the total time, which are these two numbers. And then for average hatefulness, I added the two. For example, if they do attack both in video 2 of David Perdue, I just added those two numbers to get that. For the average for the candidate to create their actual hatefulness score, what I did is I added the total time spent on the opposing candidates and divided it by the total time spent of the ad. I did the same thing for politicians. So in David Ossoff, what I did is I divided 39 seconds divided by 3 minutes and 10 seconds divided by 3 minutes respectively. Then to create the actual hatefulness score, I just added the two, and that is the amount of time for hatefulness. So the hatefulness score is representative of what percent of time of an ad will be dedicated to being inherently hateful towards anybody else, whether it be candidates or Washington in general, because both can appear negative just to average viewers. So the hatefulness score of John Ossoff is 27.22, David Perdue is 55, and it goes all the way down for 70 candidates. I linked where I found the video and I categorized it. I had 4 categories. Is it an attack on the opponent, attack on Washington? Is it promoting voting, or is it promoting their platform? And then this number on the side, this is the hatefulness score per race. So I averaged the 2 candidates' hatefulness scores to create the score for the race itself. So for this, I wanted to see if there was a correlation between hatefulness of the candidates and the race closeness. To find the race closeness, what I did is I took candidates 1 vote percentage and candidate 2's vote percentage and subtracted them. So if candidate 1 received 60, candidate 2 received 40, 60 minus 40 is 20, the race closeness is 20. For simplicity's sake, I made it so that positive numbers were Republican wins and negative were Democrat wins. So as you can see, the average hatefulness for all of the scores was about a 30.59. And there was really no strong correlation between the race closeness and the average hatefulness of candidates. And the total time of the ads that I watched to gather this set of data was about 3 hours and 39 minutes. The average hatefulness on other candidates was about 21, and the average hatefulness of politicians was about 9. All of these meaning that the amount of time on average spent in an ad being hateful is about a third. So what I decided to do after that, after I saw no strong correlation, I was wondering if certain aspects of the candidates themselves would contribute to hatefulness. And I found that Republicans are about 40, the average score for Republicans is 40, Democrats is about 24. These are comparing the two. As we can see on the bottom now, it is percent of votes they received with their average hatefulness. In both cases, as they received more votes, their hatefulness score actually went down, though, as we can clearly see, and along with the averages, Republicans are much more hateful in their ads than Democrats. I also looked at incumbent versus non-incumbent. Incumbents' hatefulness scores are about 30 and non-incumbents are 34. And this is our first actual upward slanting line. Comparing the two, we can see that, first of all, non-incumbents are receiving less of the vote. That is historically true. Incumbents are more likely to be reelected. But non-incumbents are actually, they are winning more of the vote when they were more hateful. And for winners versus losers, obviously it's going to be a bit over 50% for winners. The average is about 27 for their hatefulness score, and for losers, it is 34.26. Comparing these two, losers are more likely to get almost 50% of the votes. It's going to be a closer race for the losers if they're actually more hateful. But for the winners, just as we saw the trends with Republican, Democrat, and incumbents, the more vote they receive, the actually less hateful they're going to get. So I came to the conclusion that Republicans in the 2020 senatorial election races are more hateful than Democrats. That is, they spend about 40% of their time being hateful, whereas Democrats are 25% of their time. The average time they spent focusing on other candidates was about 25%, but the average time they spent on being hateful towards politicians in general was about 15%. And the average time Democrats spent on candidates was about 19%, and the time they spent on politicians was about 6%. So as we can see, there is a pretty wide gap between both of these numbers, which could be because the 2020 election was fairly contentious for Republicans. They did in fact lose 4 seats and they only gained 1 in a different state, but it could be in contention with that or the presidential election race in general. And the only time an increase in hatefulness correlated with an increase in vote percentage is losers. It doesn't mean they would win, they just got closer to 50% of the vote when they were more hateful. But the only time hatefulness actually increased the vote percentage, and that equated with a win, was in non-incumbents. The more hateful the non-incumbents were, the actual more likely they were to get elected, which could be accounted to the fact that they have more to attack than incumbents, because they can look at, deciding history for the incumbents. They can look at, past records, whereas incumbents cannot do that towards non-incumbents, or it is more difficult, especially if they hadn't held a political office before. So those are my conclusions. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.